Well, I don't know how you can be like a silent partner with the Raiders and not be involved in discussions and everything versus the TV career. And I guess first of all, he doesn't need the money from the TV career, so I guess he would, if indeed it's true, he probably said, you know what, I'm expecting to take a more active role with the Raiders, and that would that would constitute a huge conflict of interest as far as covering teams and finding out information, inside information on those teams that could obviously be Raiders opponents at some point.
So you're saying we could cancel the GoFundMe for Tom?
Yeah, I think it's still out there somewhere. I think it's only at about 62 million.
How's everybody doing?
Everybody's doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing good, but you're still living in that place with that beautiful background. I don't understand it.
I refuse to sell, Jim. I refuse to sell.
I see that.
I'm doing great because last Saturday was the first Saturday I've had free since September. Actually, since August. With the contest and everything. So
I should have taken last week off. I was so fucking bad.
You mean wild card?
Yeah,
week 18.
I didn't do good with the wild card. Then I didn't do good with anything actually. It was just a bad week.
Yeah, I have had a terrible 2025. So
the only thing that really surprised me last week was not that Houston won, but they won in such domination. Well, we'll talk about it. Well, I guess we're on all right now. So
yeah, we're on.
Yeah, that they won in such dominating.
The thing is, Andy, did they really win, or did Herbert play on their team for a while?
Well, Houston had a lot to do with that. I don't think that anyone would have if you told me the final score of that game was going to be, what was it, 32-12, I would have said, yeah, well, the Chargers have shown good form the last few weeks of the season. Considering just 2 weeks earlier, Houston, which had been playing poorly, they had gotten blown out by Baltimore, 31-9? That really came out of nowhere for Houston. And now
whoever took Houston thought that it was Houston's defense that won the game, and whoever took the Chargers thought that Justin Herbert lost the game. No. That's usually the way it works.
Yeah, Houston's defense had a lot to do with the performance of Justin Herbert.
The question about Herbert is, he's been there 5 years now. He had a really bad coach for a while, so yeah, you really have to question all that. But is he really what we think he is?
Well, I'll put it this way. He had 3 interceptions the entire year, throwing something like 400-something passes. The fact that he had 4 in one game, I think, tells you more about the team that they played than about Herbert.
And they weren't all his fault. There was
they rarely are always a quarterback's fault. But to go through a season with just 3 interceptions and you're playing, I think he played every game, maybe missed one. That's pretty phenomenal.
That is phenomenal. Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I'm doing the podcast.
Going to end up with Pittsburgh.
All right, bye.
Ahead of Fields.
Well,
we'll see. I mean, whoever's somebody's going to have to pay him to either. He's not going to just go on a.
I mean, they don't pay Fields or Russell much money.
True.
I would have a hard time believing that they're going to settle on Darnold and say we're going to pay this guy what basically Geno Smith money.
Yeah, he had 9 sacks. A lot of that, a lot of it was he holds the ball too long, but a lot of it is like he had no protection from that offensive line. I don't know how many quarterbacks might have been able to avoid some of the sacks that Darnold endured.
Yeah, but it was a replay from the Detroit game. I mean, he was you're 4th and 2. You got to get rid of it. I mean,
it looks like he was shell shocked. For God's sake,
well, 4th and 2. If you're going to pass 4 and 2, that's like a 3-second release. Stop back and throw it to a back or something, or somebody who's just going over the middle.
Yeah, I mean, if you could hold the ball 5 seconds, everything would be fine.
Yeah. I still can't get over these coaches who insist on these running backs when it's like 3rd and 3 and they line up 8 yards deep or 5 yards deep. Because that's making it 3rd and 8, not 3rd and 3, and it takes several seconds for the running back to get up to the quarterback, and meanwhile the defense is teeing off when they see it looks like it's a run.
It's a different game, that's for sure.
Well, Andy, I did what a publisher is not supposed to do. Unbelievable. I wrote my whole newsletter, and two of the write-ups that I did, I pasted over previous write-ups,
Uh-oh.
which means I have to go back and rewrite two of the games.
Oh, you've got to rewrite it. Oh, okay. I thought maybe you'd like cut and paste.
No,
Use the
Mark,
template from last year or
Mark,
something.
don't feel bad. When I was reading the Peter Principle and all that stuff, they were building motels without putting bathrooms in them.
Wow.
So don't
Wow.
don't feel too bad.
Yeah. Well, unless it was like a doggy motel.
It's actually happened. It really did happen. Whoever, not the builder you want to hire. I guarantee you that.
The architect couldn't read a blueprint, huh? Wow.
It never said if it was in the blueprint or not. I don't remember that part. It's an old book, Peter Principle. I probably all heard of it.
Was that Lawrence Peters or something? I think what's the author?
I think you're
remember the
right,
book.
but I don't. It's been so long. It's
Like
got to be
40
a
years.
30 or 40-year-old book.
Yeah. Let me test my memory on that. Let me get Google out
No,
here.
you never forget anything, so it's probably
I
right.
confuse some of it, but let me see here. And it's not like I think of the book like every 5 years. No, Lawrence J. Peter.
There you go. See that?
All right.
I have more faith in you than you do.
I sort of hesitate a little bit on the possibility.
Andy,
sometimes
you would have
they
been great on Jeopardy, and you would have killed it on Sports Jeopardy.
I always I don't watch the show as much now because the quality of the production has gone way down. The answers that they allow, they're much more lenient, even though the answers are not even technically correct, but they'll mispronounce a word or something and allow it, and it just the quality has just gone down.
Yeah, that sounds like our society today.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jeopardy.
That's close enough. Close enough.
Yeah. And the Peter Principle probably applies to Jeopardy. I mean, how do you do any better than Alex Trebek?
No, that's a hard one to follow.
And it's not so much Alex Trebek as much as I think it is the staff in the back, the producer and whatever, who allow certain answers to go through and things like that. Ken Jennings, I never really objected to him being the host. He's fine. He handles it. When he was a contestant, he never really showed the personality side that he has as he does with host.
So is everybody good with next week? We're going to start talking some college hoops.
Sure.
Yeah, I have to find some good sources, or I think.
Oh yeah, I'll send you some of those. It's on my to-do list.
Thank
and we'll
you,
make
Tony.
sure to, and again, we'll put something together in the next couple of days regarding what we're going to specifically talk about. Obviously, we're not going to go, hey, let's talk about the entire nation. We'll try to work our way in. Maybe talk about the SEC might be a really good topic to start the conversation with next week.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask, I mean, all you guys follow college sports much more than I do, but how much has the portal affected college sports overall, football
I would
and basketball?
I would argue, and I know Tony will have, I would argue even more, because you're talking about a sport where only 5 players are involved in one time. So 1 or 2 transfers has a huge impact on the roster. I don't know about your thoughts, Tony.
No, at this point, look, you're recruiting year-round from other rosters. Then you have to set up your team. That's tough in its own right, getting the chemistry set up over the first month or two. That's why they're such weird upsets. And then a coach has to pick his rotation. He's got to figure out where he went wrong early. And so now we're starting to see teams really rise up. And but still we had 2 double-digit upsets last night. And I would think that there is no dominant team in the country except Auburn when healthy right now. So you could probably get 10, 12, 14 teams that feel they can win it all. So there's a lot of parity, but I think like we saw last year, we'll see if it follows suits again this year. There will be less upsets in the first and second rounds.
Yeah, I think
Hey guys,
also
let's get into the podcast if we can, because I have
Sure.
work to do. I have to go back and circle back and redo things, if you know what I'm saying. So, and I got people waiting for the newsletter. So if we can, let's begin this puppy.
Let's knock it out.
In the water, okay?
Sure.
Okay. Counting down 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Mark Lawrence, along with a cast of experts as we go against the spread on this playoff week, the final championship week of the playoffs in college football, the divisional round playoffs in the National Football League. A lot of good information to be had here on this podcast. And with that, I want to welcome Victor King from King Creole Sports. Victor, I know you've been working really, really hard on getting the database all set and everything for us here at the Playbook offices. And I know you're looking forward to the NFL playoffs as well.
I am, Mark. It looks like 4 out of the 6 of us got the wear a black shirt memo today, huh? 4 of us did it, right? Hey, first round surprises, wild card surprises. Number 1, 5 out of the 6 wild card games went under the total. Surprise number 2, 5 out of the 6 games were blowouts, right? Double-digit winning margins in 5 out of the 6 games. The only close game was the Sunday nighter, Washington and Tampa Bay. And you know what? It was still a good week for the dogs. I know it's split out, basically. The big favorites covered the point spread, 5.5 or more. They went a perfect 3-0 straight up in ATS. And we cautioned against betting against those big favorites last week. But the interesting thing, it was the short dogs. The dogs of 3 or less. Not only did they go a perfect 3-0 ATS, they went a perfect 3-0 straight up. So we actually got 3 outright underdog winners in wild card action. Those are my surprises or takeaways from wild card weekend.
Well, there were 4 teams that played last weekend, guys, that took the field with same season revenge, and only one of them got home, cashed a ticket, won the football game. So you could basically throw that out the window when you're handicapping football games, unless it's very, very meaningful. And on this weekend's NFL Divisional Round playoff card, we're going to find 3 more teams with same season revenge, namely the Houston Texans, the LA Rams, and the Buffalo Bills. We'll see how all that fares out in the wash. Jim Feist, I don't want to ask you how your week was because I know how your week was. Do we want to belabor the point, or do we want to talk about this coming weekend's card?
Well, you hate to start off with a negative, but I like to be honest, and because we all have customers, and my job is to make them money and make me money, and I did not do a good job last week. So apologies to that. I'm going to work harder this week to get it done. But being in this business 6 decades, there have been other bad weeks along the way. So we're going to try not to repeat it.
Well, that's, what goes around comes around. You know that, Jim. And we always say that saying that we often overuse in this industry is, we don't want to win. We don't want to win the battle. We want to win the war. And that's what we're in it for, is to win the war. And we know better than anybody that losing streaks and spells are going to come. But when the winning times are here, everybody's happy. Tony Mejia, playbook expert and contributor to the Sporting News. How was your week last week?
It was not great. I mean, I think I'm more frustrated with college than I am with the NFL. The NFL started great. 2-0 Saturday. I was on the Texans, and I know most people were on the Chargers, and I was on the Ravens. So it looked to be great, but I thought Tampa Bay would handle business against Washington. I thought Denver taking the points with Denver, and that started off well. Would have been the smart move, but Buffalo obviously annihilated them. Actually, Philly came through. But my big play was the over in the Minnesota and the Rams. I just thought Sam Darnold would come back from that awful performance against Detroit. And the fact that it wasn't a true road atmosphere, I thought would help him do that. That was really my tiebreaker. Do I really want to trust this guy? But Kevin O'Connell, proven play caller, and really hadn't seen what we saw from this Rams defense to the point that we saw it at. I mean, they've been great down the stretch. There's no question about that. But I just thought that in a playoff game, we'd get more of a shootout. Obviously, the Rams did their part, and Minnesota did not. So it was a really disappointing Monday. So hopefully things pick up. NBA is getting there, and so is college basketball. So, but it's certainly a disappointing start to 2015 for me, and hope to do better.
There's sunshine at the end of the rainbow here, Tony. That's what we're going to get to real quick. Andy Isco. How did Andy Isco fare this past week?
So week, more disappointing. I split out in the colleges. I had the I had Notre Dame in that first game, and I had Texas in the second one. And of course, Texas looked as though I had the under in that game more so than the side, but it looked as though this was going to be a 21-21 tie when that key turnover happened for the Ohio State touchdown. So the 28-14 score somewhat misleading, and that might actually have some impact on the way folks go this weekend or this Monday on the championship game. But NFL was disappointing to a certain extent. I think I mentioned that I think we had started recording already that I wasn't shocked that Houston beat the Chargers. I was shocked at the decisiveness of that victory. And I did like the Chargers in the game, but I also went back and recalled that last year, Houston, the inexperienced Houston team, comes in. They host a playoff game against Cleveland, and they blew out the Browns. What was it, 45-14? So that was the potential. But the difference I saw this year was that Houston had not been playing well down the stretch as compared to the way they were playing really last year. So that one really surprised me. Not so much, again, that the Chargers lost, but the decisiveness. I was disappointed in the Tampa Bay game, but because I expected Washington to give a good effort, but I was on Tampa Bay, and as some of these games often do, they come down to turnovers, and there was only one turnover in that game, and that was the Mayfield fumble at the end that enabled Washington to pull out the win and advance. And by the way, as far as Washington goes, people need to take note. This is not a team that barely made it as a wild card. This is a team that was 12-5 in the regular season, so that's a very impressive record to be a wild card team, and they showed that they could compete. Remember, Tampa Bay had beaten them by double digits the first time they met in week 1 of the season. So those were really the disappointing ones. The ones I was pleased about was Buffalo doing what I thought they would do against Denver, and the Eagles getting by Green Bay. And the thing about that game, and we'll probably talk about it, is that because of the quick scores that the Eagles had, being up 10-0 after that initial fumble of the kickoff that the Eagles turned into a touchdown and then a field goal for an early 10-0 lead, they did really have to ask Jalen Hurts to do too much. And that's because the Eagles defense has been really solid all year. And if the defense could just hold the Packers in check, you didn't need Hurts to make any big plays.
Well, the defense has been rock solid for Philadelphia this year. We're going to see they have a big injury. They lost in the game. They lost their defensive captain, their star linebacker. We'll see how they adjust this week. Greg DePalma, 3 dogs, 1 games on the scoreboard last week. Any money line dogs for Greg DePalma last week?
No, I mean, the Packers laid a big egg, and Jordan Love, kept expecting that, hoping, if you're a Packer fan, that he would get some of that magic back from last year, and it just never happened. It was not a good year for Jordan Love. I know there's a lot of talk about the fact that they're going to need to find a true number 1 wide receiver to help him out. He's got a lot of good receivers, but he doesn't really have a true number 1. And without Watson, that kind of really, made it even harder for him. But it is what it is. And I was actually on the Rams, but it was one of those situations where I liked them, but I liked them even more after following the weekend that you had, Mark, because you were having such a good week. And also the point that you made last week regarding the road team being the favorite, going to, even though it was not a home game for the Rams, it's still going to go down as such that the 2 home teams that were dogs in the wild card round won. And that included the Rams winning easy. So that kind of bailed me out for having a really bad weekend. So, of course, I appreciate Mark helping me out there. And then I looked at the Coffee Club email this week, and we have a few things we'll talk about later on the show. But I found out why Mark Lawrence picked on our Super Bowl preview special, which is available here on Proline TV. You can check it out in the library. We did it last week with Ryan Dunleavy and Jim Feist. Why Mark picked the Baltimore Ravens to win the Super Bowl. So I looked at, this was one of the Coffee Club emails, stat of the day, which was number 12. The Ravens have won the Super Bowl every 12 years this century, 2001, 2013, and both title-winning teams were led by 28-year-old quarterbacks, Trent Dilfer and Joe Flacco. It's been 12 years since Baltimore hoisted the Lombardi Trophy. Lamar Jackson is 28. Hence, Mark's pick for the Super Bowl, the Baltimore Ravens.
Well, that's not the reason, I can assure you, Greg. But
I was going to say, that reminds me of the comparison. I forget that. I think it was Buddy Starcher was the guy who did it after the Kennedy assassination, drawing all the comparisons between Kennedy and Lincoln. Like Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy,
Yep.
Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. Wilkes Booth was born in 1809 or 1839, and Harvey.
So some like
Harvey Oswald,
Nostradamus stuff.
Exactly. That's kind of
Yeah.
like what I was just thinking back on when you talked about all those comparisons.
Well,
about the
actually, the
Ravens.
reason why I think it might work is because if you're a NASCAR fan, you'll know that this is the same type of situation. Joey Logano, who won the championship this year, had won the championship in even numbered years over the last 5 years. So this was an even number year, and he was in the playoffs, and he was about to be eliminated, like in the third round or whatever. But the driver that had beaten him out was eliminated after the race because he did not pass inspection. So because of that, Joey Logano was awarded to move on in the playoffs, even though he basically had not made it through on his own. And everybody started thinking, oh, there you go. You see, it's the even numbers years. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Joey Logano goes on and wins the championship. So you just never know.
The Giants in baseball won 3 championships every other year back at the start of the teens.
Right.
Well, a lot of that is fate, guys. And let's get into our NFL Divisional Round playoff games this weekend, if we will, and take a look at the first game on tap. Kansas City, are they a team of fate, a team of destiny? Will they be the first team to win 3 Super Bowls in a row? I know Andy Reid likes his chances real well this coming up in these playoffs here. I'm going to take it back to you, Victor. Your take on Houston and Kansas City this week. What do you see from an over-under total aspect in the game?
Well, this is the lowest total ever for Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. We're right down there at about 41.5. Sharp bettors know 41 is a key number in the NFL. There are many different popular scoring combinations in which a game can finish exactly on 41 points. So the odds makers have done a fantastic job, again, with the line of 41.5. Again, his lowest total. The previous low in the Patrick Mahomes playoff game was last year against the Dolphins, in which it was 43.5. That extremely cold game in Kansas City. You do remember it. Of course, Chiefs held the Dolphins to just 1 touchdown. That game did indeed go under the total. For me, Mark, I'm laying off the total. I am cautioning laying the points with the Chiefs. Of course, from our database in the division round, home teams coming in with rest. The 2 division round home teams coming in with rest. That's Kansas City. That's Detroit. Both of the Saturday home teams have not done actually particularly well. 27-36 ATS since 2006. Even worse, they've gone 14-22 against the spread when they're favored by a touchdown or more, which is the case in both of these games. We know that Chiefs struggle laying the big points and have indeed done that in the last 2 or 3 seasons. So we would lean toward taking the points in the game. I know the over-under line, again, is currently right at 41.5. If you are going to bet the game under the total, make sure you get a 41.5 or higher, because it could very easily go down to 41 or even less by the time we get to the Saturday kickoff, in which the weather looks doesn't look great there in Kansas City, at least clear, no precipitation, 20 to 24 degrees. But this will be the most wind-impacted game of the 4 this weekend. Winds could be anywhere in the nature of 15 to 20 miles an hour. So, again, we could have the most wind-impacted game of the 4 here on Saturday afternoon.
Hey, Victor, we talked last week about the importance of these playoff games and what they mean and how the defense usually really surfaces in games like this. We saw an abundance of unders last week. Do you foresee that being the case with the divisional round games this week on the whole?
It's a tough round to call, Mark, but I do think we're going to get at least 2 of the 4 games going over the total this particular week. One more in regards to this game. Houston was the NFL's #1 team in the first half this season. Houston. They did it again last week. If you bet Houston in the first half of that game in their wild card win, they've gone 14-4 against the spread in the first half this season. followed by Detroit, the second best first half team. So I might consider actually grabbing the points with Houston in the first half of the game. Yeah, Kansas City's been a dynamite second half team, but again, the value may be on grabbing Houston plus 3.5 or more in the first half of this game.
Well, Victor's going under the total in that game, Kansas City-Houston, for the matchup on Saturday. Jim Feist, what do you think happens between the Chiefs and the Texans in this football game? What's your initial reaction?
Well, I do think the Texans will have a harder time with Mahomes than they did with Herbert. Basically, that was a little gift wrapped. They played well. I give them credit for that. They have a good coach. I like their quarterback. They didn't have a great year like they had the previous year, but they came out and blew out their first round opponent like they did last year. They're an indoor team, and they're playing outdoors in cold weather. And as Victor said, most impacted by wind of any of the games this week. I like it under. And, the Chiefs have played with their food all year long. They've load managed with Kelsey. It's probably his last year, probably retire. But when it comes to Spagnuolo, Reed, Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco, you're talking about quality. There is only about 6 teams that are quality in the NFL. The rest of the teams are marginal or bad. And the way that Houston played this year, they weren't like they were a year ago. And their defense caused some of those turnovers last week, but this is different. I like the Chiefs, but I can't like it under and lay the Chiefs too, because in order to cover big numbers, you're going to have more points. And so I'm going to go with the under as opposed to laying the Chiefs. If it wasn't for the weather, I would probably be on both. I would probably be on the Chiefs strong, but with that weather, I'm going to probably just stick with the under.
Jim says the safer side in the football game for him will be the under total. He matches up with Victor with his side in the football game. Tony Mejia, what do you think happens in this big showdown, Kansas City and Houston?
I honestly think that the weather is not going to be that big of a factor. We're looking at weather probably being more of a factor on Sunday in both of those games. So is that good for Kansas City? Certainly, historically, it would be, because Patrick Mahomes has been lights out in the divisional round. The 6-0, and the Chiefs have scored 27 or more points in 5 of those wins. And so they just saw the Texans. So, really, you're preparing for a team you saw less than a month ago. That was a big win. I think it got them to 15-1, might have been 14-1. But certainly it was a game where Mahomes played well. He threw for a score, ran for another 260 yards, completed 28 passes, and in 9 of his last 14 games, he's completed at least 26. So I think while the narrative is correct that we've seen Patrick Mahomes shine a little less bright this season, the fact that he's gotten it done to the tune that he got it done at, I think bodes well for him playing well to start. And then I also think if you're Houston, not that you come in with nothing to lose, because at this point, you can smell it, and you pulled off a great win after a really disappointing season. I think I had them as my Super Bowl dark horse, and certainly that never materialized. This is a game that is a rematch from the Tank Dell game. Obviously, Dell was having a great game at that point. It was on a Saturday afternoon, December 21st, and Dell suffered that horrific injury. We probably won't see him at all next season. Hopefully, we'll see him again in the future. But it does take a weapon away from C.J. Stroud, one of his favorite weapons, and they just cut Deontay Johnson because I guess he's such a headache that no locker room can stand him being in it, whether prosperity or not. So I'm a little leery of how Houston plans to move the ball here, but I also think you're not going to beat the Chiefs 13-9. So I think there's going to be letting Stroud let it rip. He's had interceptions in the last 3 games he's played. So I think this is a case where the over is my play, slightly into the Chiefs on laying the points, and I love Joe Mixon over 15.5 rushing attempts. He ran 25 times against the Chargers, and I think if you want to stay in it early and you want to keep some pressure off Stroud, you hand the ball to Mixon and see what he can do. And even in the second half, if you're down, Mixon will get some carries. So really a low total, 15.5 for Joe Mixon rushing attempts.
Player props and sides from Tony Mejia in this football game. There'll be a lot of eyeballs in this contest. It's Kansas City defending champions. They took that embarrassing loss when they laid everybody down. I think they played practice players against Denver when they were beat 38-0. I don't know what that'll mean to the team. All I know is that they have their eye on the prize, and that's the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl here this upcoming football season. Andy Iskoe, what do you think happens between these two AFC teams?
Well, it's interesting because last year, after beating Cleveland, Houston went to Baltimore and got soundly defeated. So they have that feeling. Last year was an inexperienced team. They may have been really elated about winning that game, but now they want to take another step. Now, of course, to take that other step, they're going to have to beat Kansas City. Well, as Tony pointed out, these teams played each other just less than a month ago. It was the 21st of December. That was a very competitive game. In fact, early in the third quarter, down 17-10, Houston scored a touchdown in the early part of the third quarter. They missed the extra point, so they were down 17-16. The Chiefs scored at the end of the third quarter, about 2 minutes left to go, up 24-16. The Houston scored a field goal in the fourth quarter to make it 24-19, and then Kansas City got the last field goal to make the final score 27-9, so 27-19. So I can see. By the way, in that game there were only 2 turnovers, and they were both on Houston, as Stroud had 2 interceptions in that game. So I can give Houston an opportunity. We keep waiting for the Chiefs to roll, and they had a couple of nice wins late in the year. I put absolutely zero. In fact, I ignore that 38-0 loss to Denver. It means absolutely nothing. But if you go back to that first game on the 21st, I think Kansas City had already clinched the division, and Houston was still in a battle with Indianapolis for the AFC South title. They ended up losing that game, but it was an important game, and they played well against a team on the road at Kansas City, against a team that they figured if they were going to make it to the AFC Championship game or to the Super Bowl, they at some point would have to face Kansas City, because it was extremely unlikely, even though Indianapolis was alive heading into the last week or two of the season, it was very unlikely that anyone from the AFC South would earn a wild card. So I give Houston a lot of credit. I think they have confidence, not just from last week because they had played a very hot Charger team, but from the experience of last year. So I don't know how strong of a play it'll be, but I also do agree on the under in this game, because I think the strength of Houston is more their defense than their offense. And because of the decline in the offense this year for Kansas City, you have to say that the defense of Kansas City is almost as much of a strength for them as their offense has been in the past for the Chiefs.
Greg DePalma, we're hearing a lot of under talk here in this around the table with the experts to begin here on this contest here. Are you liking a side or a total in this football game?
No, I'm not a total guy, and I'm definitely not going to go up against any of these experts. If they say the under's the play, then I'm going to play the under. But as far as the game, yeah, it's a lot of points to give up. I don't like giving up a lot of points. I'm just going to look at the fact that experience has shown that the Chiefs, they don't really blow out many teams. I know it's the playoffs, so things are a little bit different. The stakes are a little bit higher. I think it'll matter a little bit more for them to try to put the game away if they can earlier. So look, it's probably not a game I'm going to touch. If I did, I'd take the Chiefs. I'm not betting against the Chiefs. The Chiefs, as we talked about last week, that's definitely my pick. And I just don't like the way Houston's played all season. They just haven't played well consistently. The defense bailed them out last week. There was no question about it, whether or not you want to say it was, and I look at it like most things. I think it was a mixture of both. They played really good defense, and Herbert was terrible. So that combination, is not going to happen this week, because Patrick Mahomes is not going to normally play terrible when the game counts. If he does, then watch out for the Houston Texans. But I think history and logic says that that Mahomes will come through, and I just don't like how Houston's going to be able to put up enough points to overcome the Chiefs. I think the one thing they do have an advantage on possibly is that we know their offensive line, the Chiefs, is not really the best, especially on the outside. They've got great players, but they've got a major issue on the outside And that is something that Houston might be able to take advantage of.
Just a quick note to piggyback on Mahomes in this round: 6-0, 16 touchdowns, no picks, 1,813 yards.
Whoa.
So
I'm not betting against that.
That's not bad, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't. How can you fade that, especially with the
No.
football team that's mad, angry, and focused?
Yeah. How about you, Mark? What do you
I
like?
think this game's got blowout written all over it on the Kansas City side. What you're doing here is you're taking an advantage, I think, of a Houston Texan team that won an opportunistic game when they were installed as home underdogs. Sort of a slap in the face. They stepped up. They answered that challenge. Now they're going to take out onto the road. And I'm going to share this with our listeners out there. This is from our playbook preview guide, or our playbook playoff guide, I should say, football newsletter this particular week. And it involves teams in the division round who won straight up as a home underdog the first round, and now they take onto the road in the next game. Since 1984, these teams are 1-16 straight up and 2-15 to the spread.
No.
Whoa.
They just get smoked. And this is the kind of a game where I could see Kansas City smoking somebody. And I think here comes the perfect lamb, if you will, in the Houston Texans in this football game. You look at C.J. Stroud. He's not been able to step up against quality teams in 5 games in his career against 750 or better opponents, or 700 or better opponents. He's 1-4 straight up and against the spread. This is the game that I think Patrick Mahomes wants more than any to start this playoff season, because it gets this team on a roll, and that's what I think will happen here. I like Kansas City to roll in this football game.
And again, that was, did you say 1-15, Mark, straight up?
It's 1-16 straight up and 2-15 to the spread.
And that are wild card upset winners
as a home underdog.
As a home underdog.
And not taking out onto the road in the divisional round.
And by the way, this is important because if you're somebody out there that is just a novice gambler, you're just starting to do it for the first time, and you're trying to figure out the best way of, doing things and taking your heart out of it. This is something that I would think that if you're a young gambler, if you wagered, say, on Houston, and they went ahead and won a lot of money for you, and you're all excited about it, it's very hard for those young gamblers to go against them the very next week. That's something that was always hard for me. I remember that because they won me money. Let me go on them again the next week, and then I wound up losing all my money back. So I think that's important for anybody out there. That's why you can't bet with your heart.
One of the important things, and it sort of is in line with what you say, Greg, and even though it was a win last week, these are the playoffs. These are when the teams who have been sort of struggling throughout the season will find out. We'll find out this week if Kansas City, and they may win the game, but let's see if Kansas City struggles throughout the season, evidence themselves here, because, this is a game where you can make a case that, okay, we're going to see the Kansas City team that we've seen the last few years in the playoffs, because the playoff intensity is a lot greater, even if you faced a team recently. I still think Houston is decent enough to give Kansas City a game, but it could be entirely different because these are the playoffs.
Remember, this Kansas City team was playing their best football of the season going to the last week when they decided to rest their regulars. They had won 6 games pretty convincingly, unlike their earlier wins when they went undefeated and were winning games by 1-score margins. So they were beginning to become a real
they did have that close call against the Raiders that they should have lost at the end at home. So.
What do you think, Mark? What would your advice be if, let's say, because I'm assuming this is going to also work against the Rams. So if, let's say, Houston covers and it's the first game, it starts the weekend, what do you say to anybody then that is thinking about the Ram game? Because I could also see a situation where, let's say, the Rams cover. I don't know. Do you put like an asterisk in it because they weren't really a home dog? I mean, they were like a neutral site dog.
It was definitely a neutral site game because you could hear the Minnesota fans were equally as vocal. So it was technically, it was essentially a home game that they deserved, but clearly it was. I mean, I don't know how you handicap it, Mark, but I handicap this. I handicap the game Monday night as clearly a neutral site game.
Yep, same here.
Victor, let me ask you, and I know I pretty much do too as well. In our database, we have 4 statistical categories: home favorite, home dog, road favorite. Do we have a designated home dog?
In that game, I totally agree with Andy. We counted that as a neutral site
Yes,
playoff game
absolutely.
in our database.
Right.
Okay.
Haven't
There
been
you go.
many of those, right? Outside of the Super Bowl.
Right.
Well, I'm
But
glad to
I'm
hear
going to
that
share with
because
you
I
guys
like the
another
Rams.
nasty angle against the Rams coming up
Now-
when we get to that game.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question, Mark, and Victor as well. Games in London. Do you count those as neutral site games or road games for both teams? I count them as neutral sites.
Neutral site regular season games. Yes,
Yes,
Andy.
for both teams.
And one last thing, because I guess I am the lone contrarian on this over, but again, I'm not to play it much at all. Like I think Houston will have to get maybe a garbage time touchdown there because I'm
Right.
more inclined to lay with the Chiefs than ride with the over. But we do have to respect that Patrick Mahomes off an ankle injury has now had weeks to heal, and Andy Reid gets in the lab with what last time we've seen them actually out there. It's been a month. He's got Hopkins. He's got Hollywood Brown now healthy. He's got all these weapons. So I mean, we should see them. And I think this is the key to the over/under angle on this game. They've sputtered in the red zone, at least early on in the season, to keep teams in games. I hopefully we see a couple of trick plays that will result in 6 instead of 3.
Yeah, Tony's not wrong. They just played a few weeks ago, like you mentioned. It was 27-19. The game went over the total. Houston got to 19 points in the game. They're going to need to get to 17 or more for the game, for the over to cash. So again, he's not wrong. They just played a few weeks ago. This is Patrick Mahomes' first game since Christmas Day, isn't it, guys? It's been that long since Patrick Mahomes actually played a game, right?
Yeah, he's been playing with his newborn child here. His wife had a third baby. Their names are really kind of funky names.
I saw them. What was it? Is it Sterling, Bronze, and what's the other one? Bronze is the new one, and Sterling was the first one, and the other one's in the same theme, but it escapes me right now.
Yeah, they're all like named after metals of some kind.
At least it's not peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe bullion. Silver,
not bullion, not gold bullion. Okay, let's go back to Victor here now. Another big game, Detroit and Washington, the second of the 2 number 1 seeds that are on this weekend's card, both playing on Saturday, by the way, which means they're looking for some big ratings in the television with both of these number 1 seeds. Victor, what do you see happening up and down wise in this Washington-Detroit matchup?
Well, obviously, it's one of the biggest storylines of the entire weekend is this extremely high over-under line. In the Lions-Washington Commanders game, open 54.5. It's been bet up to 55. There's even 55s as we speak. We wouldn't be surprised if the line continues to go up. So again, big storyline, 55.5. That's where I started my database querying. Is I went into our NFL playoff database. I took a look at NFL playoff games with a line of 55 or higher. Going back to 1999, they've gone 9 overs. They've gone 7 unders in these games. Again, 55 or higher. Now, recently, it's skewing slightly lower in the last 6 of those games. 2 overs, 4 unders. But here's what the interesting thing is: when the home team is favored in these games, the over numbers are actually pretty good. Another interesting aspect about this game is the fact that it's one of those rare indoor games this weekend. It's the only indoor game of the weekend. So we go to our playoff dome database. And there was a period there from 2019 to 2022, a 4-year period in which the 12 dome playoff games went 1 over, 11 unders. They were extremely low scoring during that 4-year period. However, in the last 2 seasons, there's been 6 dome playoff games. 5 of those games have ended up going over. Only 1 has gone under. So there's been a recent pattern. Last just couple of seasons when these games have been a little bit higher scoring than people think. Based on the current line of 9.5 and 55.5, the implied score is Detroit 32.5, Washington 23.0. So we always look at the implied score as well, because we ask ourselves, Well, let's see. Detroit, 32 points, 32 and a half is their implied score. That's a dead number. They're not going to score 32. Well, are they more likely to score 30 or 31? Are they more likely to score maybe 35, 38, maybe even crack 40 points? What's more likely to happen is what you want to ask yourself in regards to the Lions. Same thing with Washington. They have an implied score of 23.0 points. That's kind of a dead number as well. Doesn't happen very often. Are they more likely to score 20 or 21? Are they more likely to score 24 to 27 points? I think this is one of those 4 games in which there should be some points in the game. We lost 2 weeks ago when Detroit hosted Minnesota in that final regular season game of the year. But take a look at Detroit's numbers at home. They've been the best home indoor over team easily over the last 5 years. I'm not going to be touching the side. I lean toward Washington, but I think we could have a very, very exciting shootout here, and I'm going to have some sort of action on the over.
A little bit of action on the over, Victor, in the Detroit-Washington Redskin football matchup. Jim Feist, what's your take? How do you see this game shaking down?
Well, first of all, the stats you had on home underdogs in the next round, I'm still picking myself up off the floor. That's pretty incredible. The Washington, they beat Tampa last week. It was the fumble at the end. Baker made a mistake, and it cost him the game. You can't take anything away from Quinn, what he's doing there, the new ownership. The play of Daniels has been incredible. They have talent. They got a lot of weapons. That's a very good team, and it's going to get nothing but better. Next year, they're going to be a force. They're not that they're not a force now, but Detroit is a different animal. This is arguably, a lot of people thought this was the best team in football until they started to get the defensive injuries. They've had some time to heal up. They've been getting players back. They've now had the bye week. Dan Campbell's not going to take his foot off the gas, but he could slow them down. And that is very possible. There's going to be a lot of pressure. We saw what they did with Darnold. Daniels handles pressure better than Darnold does, for sure. But 55 is too big a number for me to go. I'm not going to try to go over that. It could easily – Detroit could get a big lead and just slow them down. And with their running game and their offensive line, which they have one of the best, they could easily do that and keep the ball away, play keep away, because they got other games coming up. They're going to be tough. So I'm not going to try to go over that number. It's just a big number. I like the favorite. I don't think Washington's going to be able to stay with them. I think the way that Detroit plays at home, they're a mean machine at home. And Washington accomplished a lot last week, just like Houston accomplished a lot last week. But sometimes when you do that, that's what you wanted to do. And this is a different animal. Detroit's a different animal at home. They're mean. Campbell doesn't stop. He puts a lot of pressure on you. Their defensive coordinator is very, very good. Their offensive coordinator is very, very good. I think it's a mismatch in a lot of ways, and I favor the favorite. Now, let me talk a little bit about, we haven't spoken about this, but there's a thing called a teaser. And Kansas City and the Lions, in an optimal teaser situation, taking it down under 3, because they're both teaser protected. And Andy could probably explain that better than I can. But that's basically putting a number up that makes it hard to get down under the 3. I suggest those two teams in a teaser is a very, very, very strong play.
I like the thinking there, Jim. 2 number 1 seeds at home, teasered under 3. That sounds like a real nice recipe for success. I'm not a big teaser guy, but it sure opens my interest up, I can tell you that. Wow, nice stat there, Jim. Okay, let's move on.
Andy, what's the name they call that? The optimal teaser? Is it a Wong teaser?
Yeah, the Wong teaser, right? WONG, right?
Right. That's what that is. It's crossing numbers, the live numbers, Yeah,
4,
two,
7,
it's
3.
2, 3, 4, 7, 8.
Right. If so, you
Crossing, yeah.
try to get your teaser to pass those numbers so you don't get into that situation.
Very good, Jim. We're gonna put you down for that 2-team teaser here on the show, just on
Oh,
record. because-
I might add another team.
Okay. Oh, you may have a 3-teamer. Okay.
Well, but we have to wait till we cross over to the colleges.
Okay. There we go. Okay. With that, Tony Mejia, what do you think happens here? Lions, Commanders. Does Washington continue its winning ways? Does Detroit take advantage of the week of rest and make amends for the egg they have in their face from the calls that Campbell made last year, denying him a chance to get to the Super Bowl? How do you see this game coming down?
One thing I'll say I'm not doing is writing off Washington as young or just because they're on the road. 6-3 on the road this season, counting the Bucs win, which was a revenge game because their first road game of the season, Daniel's debut, came in Tampa, and so we saw the growth from him. And everybody's going to rightfully harp on the Baker Mayfield turnover late, but the fact that Baker, I think, had 2 incompletions in that game, maybe 3, and was so efficient, and Washington was still able to win that game. I think it speaks highly of Daniels and Daniels' ability to perform anywhere you put him. The 2 of the road losses for Washington this season came in tight games, 1-score games against Philly and Baltimore, both regional rivals and huge games for that franchise. So he's really stepped up. And a stat that Pro Football Focus put together: 9 of 10 on passes of 10 plus yards and 2 touchdowns, and a perfect quarterback rating against Tampa Bay. So he was not just thinking and dunking. That being said, this is an Aaron Glenn-led defense that has gotten it done with duct tape and smoke and mirrors often because of all the injuries that they've suffered. And they got back Alex Anzalone, which is a big deal for the middle of that defense. They got him back for the Minnesota game, and he made a significant impact. One of their top corners, Terrion Arnold, was hurt, but apparently he's practicing and will be full go. So that's great for their defense. And then can Dan Quinn slow down a Detroit offense that has been, among the NFL's best? I think the only way that happens is if Jared Goff has one of his, I won't say trademark because he's come out of them a lot, but his poor games where he's just slightly off, slightly inaccurate, making the wrong read, and then that would open the door. And I think Dan Quinn is capable with a defense that I believe at least one of us, me, and probably I got some backup, a defense that we called garbage early in the season because Washington on paper is not expected to be what they became defensively. I mean, they really did a sound job on that side of the ball. And, that's a credit to Quinn and that coaching staff. The coordinator is Joe Witt Jr., who I saw got a head coaching interview, which is his first. So clearly people are noticing a monumental test. I'm saying that if I go anywhere here, it's probably taking the points with Washington, and I lean towards the under simply because there will probably be an instance or two where Dan Campbell goes for it on 4th and fails. Even if he makes it, that continues a running clock. I think Jaden Daniels just proved that he's able to shorten games. He just did it to Tampa by converting on 3rd and 4th downs. And while most people would say, well, if you're converting on 3rd and 4th downs, doesn't that produce points? Not necessarily, because it increases time of possession. So slightly towards the under and the Washington Commanders.
Tony leans to the under and the Commanders in the football game. Andy Isco, what do you think happens between these two NFC, not rivals, but NFC playoff opponents this particular week?
Well, when I look at this game, I like what I've seen. I liked what I saw out of Detroit in that game against Minnesota, a game that they had to have, a game that they felt they didn't really need to be in because they felt they'd have the division wrapped up by that time. And ironically enough, or interestingly enough, they thought their main opposition this year was not going to be Minnesota, but the Green Bay Packers. And yet there they were playing in a situation where they needed to win. And after a sluggish first half, they extended their lead against the Vikings 17-9 and Then they added a couple of touchdowns late, but the defense played very, very well, despite being much maligned and having a lot of those issues over the course of the season. Now, Tony brought up a very good point, and part of it has to do with the improvement of the Washington defense throughout the season. And keep in mind, head coach Dan Quinn, well, his background is running defenses. I think he was they was in Seattle before he got the job in Atlanta. And so I wasn't surprised to see the team make strides, and the numbers back it up, over the second half of the season. So because of that, and because, we don't know how the Detroit defense will play, I don't know that they could play as well as they did against Minnesota, but I certainly think they can play better than they did in some of those high-scoring games that they had in the the middle third of the season, let's say, for example. So I kind of like the under as well. I think that's a big number. I can't really go over that number. And at the same time, and I was going to ask you this, Mark, because you're going to give us your thoughts in a moment as well. We talked about teams that win, the very few teams that win with road quarterbacks in their first playoff game, how those teams do in the following week, the second round of the playoffs. I'd have to think, but it's a very small database, but I'd have to think it's not very good. And we could see that out of Jalen Daniels struggling this week after having had great success last week. So I'd be inclined to do what Jim accurately says is a very dangerous not parlay, but not playing it as a parlay, but the combination of laying points and playing the under, because there's a lot of room for that game to stay under, especially if Detroit's defense plays well enough and frustrates the Commanders.
I don't have the stats on that, Andy. We don't. The only quarterback stats that I have are ones that we create a base of stats from. Our database does not go in and ferret and look for it and find it. But what I do know is that rookie quarterbacks are just 5-16 outright on the road in the playoffs. They were 4-16 until Daniels won his football game last week. So, he put a little dent per se in that number.
Actually, 4-15 before last week, because Bo Nix fit into the losing category.
Exactly. Bo Nix was on the road and he lost, so he contributes to that 5-16 number as well. Exactly. Greg DePalma, which way are you going in this game? Are you looking at a money line possibility here in this game?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm going to go big on Detroit. I can buy a little bit that Washington's defense is playing better, but they haven't played a team like Detroit's offense during this stretch. And Detroit's offense is going to score at will. I don't have any doubt about that. It's up to Washington and Jaden Daniels to keep up with them. And we're going to find out. I know it was a big defensive effort against Minnesota. I know Anzalone's back. But again, still no Hutchinson, still no McNeil, still no Carlton Davis, and they're not coming back. So we're going to find out, was that Minnesota game just a game? And we saw Minnesota the very next game did not play well either. So was that just, great strategy by Aaron Glenn? Rams, Shula picked it up and played the same D, and they found a way to beat the Minnesota Vikings, whatever. Or was it just, again, a situation where Detroit is now all of a sudden finding their groove again defensively? And we'll see. I'm still not going to back Detroit to win the Super Bowl, but at this point, I still think they're clear NFC champs, and I don't think they're going to struggle too much here. So I think it's time for Jaden Daniels. As much as I've loved him, as you know, for as long as we've been talking about him, I think it's time for him to have a game that he's going to have to grow up and learn from, and he will. He's going to be a great quarterback. But I think Detroit will win this one. And if I was going to go with the total, I'd probably go with the over. And Detroit might score about, 75% or 80% of those points.
I just sent a note that Montgomery, the running back for the Lions, is coming back for this game.
Yeah, he'll be in the mix. He's and they expect no drop off. He missed 3 games with the MCL. He's minus 165 to score a touchdown. So you get no breaks on TD props from him. And
he was written off as a season-ending injury too, guys. I don't know.
It was. Dan Campbell did say many weeks ago, and I don't remember when it was, because we have injuries on defense, we have to win our games with our offense. So we have to stay on the field longer. And that's what he did in a couple of games. We did see him do things to not give the ball back to the other side. But then, and since then, the defense has gotten a little bit better. And
It's just
some
one
of the
game.
players
Just
come
one
back.
game.
So
One
it's
game.
kind of like he's playing defense with his offense.
It also points out to the under. If Montgomery is there, it splits up and likely increases the total number of carries that the two backs will get than if Montgomery wasn't there. So again, that does help to, maybe it less. What was it? I think it was in the Charger game last week. There were like maybe 6 possessions in the entire first half, which is like incredibly low. But I think that's exactly what happens if you have the 2 running backs back there now. That yes, it takes pressure off the it takes pressure off the defense because the offense is out there longer, and if the offense is out there longer, it's going to lessen the number of possessions in the game.
Well, guys, I'm going to throw this into the ring here and say I think both number 1 seeds are going to win in advance comfortably this weekend. And there's a little bit of a flavor here to Washington that was also the same type of flavor that was against Houston in the game, in that they were a wild card underdog winner, not home dog, but an underdog winner. And if those underdog winners from the wild card round were a feeble team the previous year, they'd won 5 or fewer games, as Washington did. These teams in the role of Washington this week are 0-15 straight up and 3-12 against the spread as road dogs.
All right.
So, if you want to
let me
make
ask, excuse me, Mark,
yes.
Have you done a breakdown as to being like a 3 or 4 point road dog versus being almost a double-digit road dog? Because clearly at this point of the season, this Washington team is not resembling the Washington team that was bad last year. So maybe the point spread is a lot lower now than it might, and which is still pretty high, but they've had the kind of success. So I'm just wondering if that great record against these road underdogs takes into account, say, under or over 7 points.
Well, that's a good point, Andy, but I think with the few results that there are, just 15, I don't really kind of tear them down too much, because what am I going to find? 1-6, 1-7, maybe 1-8. All I know is you don't expect Washington to win in this particular role, because since 1981, no one has in this particular role. What Washington did last week was absolutely phenomenal headline making here. They won their first playoff game, Washington did, since 2006. And Jaden Daniels was 6 years old at the time Washington won that playoff game. That's what he's meant to this football team coming into this particular contest here.
And tearing up the Pee Wee League he was playing in at that time.
I'm sure he was. He probably had a pro scout or 2 watching him do just that as well, Andy. The other quirky thing that I came across this week is the last 5 wins by Washington have all been on the final play from scrimmage of the game. Talk about taking games down to the wire. If they put themselves in a position to do just that, obviously the spread's going to be really, really good for Washington here. I don't think this game's going to come down to a last possession for Washington, though. I think Dan Campbell has got a lot of egg to wipe off his face for those puzzling 4th down calls he made before. We're going to talk this story to death until he can overturn that. And look at Detroit this year, 14-2, 11-4-1 to the spread. They were a strong team on the scoreboard, and they were also a strong team against the number here too. I like Detroit in this football game. I think Kansas City and Detroit advance as a pair of number 1s on this weekend and on Saturday as well. Let's go to Sunday, guys, where we got a couple of big games as well. The Philadelphia Eagles are going to host the LA Rams in this football game. The Eagles and the Rams, Victor, what do you see going over under total wise here?
Well, in terms of the total, I'm going to hold off on that for our little 1 minute segment that we do late in the show. Good. Because we do have an opinion in regards to the over here as well. What I will be doing is we've been playing the Eagles in the second half of their games a lot this season. They've been a horrific first quarter team, not a great first half team, but like the Buffalo Bills, they've been a fantastic team in the second half of their games this season. It makes a lot of sense. If you remember, guys, they did play the Rams, the Eagles, earlier this year. I think it was during Thanksgiving weekend when Philadelphia went out to L.A. They beat the Rams 37-20. I think the Rams got a very, very late touchdown in the game to push the game over the total. But even more important to me is, hey, Saquon Barkley had his best game of the season against the Rams. In that game, he ran for 255 yards. He had 2 touchdown runs of 70 or more. So here's where I'm loading up. is a Saquon Barkley prop. Not necessarily his game total over, but his longest rush over. We hit last week when we played. Who's the rookie running back on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Bucky Irving.
Bucky Irving. When we played Bucky Irving over his longest rush of 16.5, he did have a 19-yard rush last week. This is the one prop I'm playing in this game is for Saquon Barkley's longest rush, over 18.5 yards in this game. Again, you saw what he did against the Rams when he had 2 70-yard touchdown runs in that game. So call it right now for me a play on Saquon Barkley, longest rush over 18.5 in this game. Heck, he could be getting the ball 30, 35 times, one big run, and we've cashed a winner.
There we go. I like that. I'm like you, Victor. I'm going to hold off for my 30-second side on this also when we get to that. I'll hit a little bit on it before we get there, before I turn this over right now to Jim Feist. But let me say this about this game. I know the Rams won as a dog in the wild card round. That's automatically supposed to be play against material. But yet the database is there for to ask questions and to punch and punch and punch until something turns out of it. Well, what turns out of it in this particular football game is major revenge in this football game. And I'm going to explain that in our 30-second or our 60-second review when it comes up here. But Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think happens here, Eagles and Rams?
Well, I'm a big fan of McVay, Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cup, the running back Williams. I was shocked at the way they didn't look good against Philadelphia the first time they played them. And now I know they don't get a lot of home field in SoFi because it's kind of LA's a funny kind of city. They don't really support the home teams all the time. But that combination of Stafford, I mean, head coach and quarterback combination is something I look for. I don't know. And first of all, let me give out this one play right now. I bet the Rams in the first half. And it kind of goes along with what Victor said in reverse. He's talking about Philadelphia in the second half. I'm going with Rams in the first half because Philadelphia doesn't play usually very well in the first half. They kind of just grind you down. Last week, they didn't do that. They did jump out to a lead. But the question I have is this Hurts issue, the concussion. I don't know if he's really 100%. He didn't look all that sharp to me. He is at times during the season, he hasn't looked all that sharp. They don't depend on him because they have a really strong running game and they have a strong defense. But now, it's really tough to know how good and how healthy he is. I like the Rams. I'd like to be getting 7, but I'm not seeing 7. So I'm probably not going to do anything with the game except play the under. I'm going to definitely play the Rams and the Eagles under. I do like the way the Rams defense is, even though they're very young, they're all draft choices, young kids, but playing very tough. And I think they're going to slow Philadelphia down a little bit, enough to keep it down. And then, of course, Philadelphia has a great defense, and I think it's going to give Stafford and company a lot harder time than they had a week ago. So I'm going.
Well, the one thing about that Philadelphia defense, Jimmy, is we talked about earlier, is that that star linebacker being out. He's the defensive captain, and I don't know if Nakobe Dean, is that his name, Tony?
Yes.
The linebacker from Philadelphia out.
Dean, yes.
Yeah, but
on that defense.
They can replace him. He's been out, I think, at a previous point in the season. So certainly it's a loss, but it's not a huge loss. It's not like losing one of their defensive linemen.
I got you. I'm only bringing the standpoint out that it was told to me that he's the defensive captain. And he calls all the plays on the defense, or he relays the signals of the plays, is what I should say. Nonetheless, but we'll see what Victor says about that over/under total side you're looking at, Jim, when we do our 60-second roundabout at the end of the show here. With that, what do you think happens here, Tony? These two football teams, Philadelphia and the Rams.
Well, for starters, I think the Rams have played obviously outdoors, but they typically don't. and this is going to be a weather game, rain and potentially snow, so we could get sleet, 40, 30-degree weather. So I think the Eagles are better equipped to handle that. However, Puka Nacua is a game changer because not only can he get open downfield, but I think we've seen his biggest strength become over the last 7 to 10 games since he's returned is he's a tremendous blocker and he'll get you the tough yards. So from that standpoint, if he can stay healthy and the Rams aren't constantly in 3rd and 8, I think they can move the football. I agree with Jim on the first half under, and I think my pick is going to be on the full game under, just because weather conditions and the fact that Hurts, they really haven't been using him to throw the ball if he doesn't have to. Tanner McKee was more effective throwing the ball to AJ Brown than Jalen Hurts was at the latter end of the season. So, and then you've got the 302 yards that Victor referenced that Saquon broke off, 302 total yards. It was 2-something rushing, franchise record, and that has to keep LA sleepless at night as they come cross country to prepare for this monster again, who's now rested with an offensive line that's rested. So I won't back the Rams here. When I looked at it, I thought it was too many points because I think it's a complicated game. I think the Eagles would have fared better against Minnesota. But again, I think Philly advances, probably not touching, laying the points, and definitely like the under, whether it's first half or full game.
First half under for Tony Mejia in this football game. Now, Greg, I'm hinting around all show long about a money line play for you. I haven't heard it. Would this be a possibility? We're down to this or nothing as far as I see here, Greg. If you like the Rams, I'm sure you'll be playing the money line here. Do you like the Rams in the game?
Yes, this is it. Absolutely. I can see this game going a couple of different ways, obviously, in mind, and maybe in a lot of other minds, which is that, and I'm going to go basically not strategy necessarily, what you guys all talked about. The Rams not very good at run defensive team, what happened the first time and all that. But just the emotional impact of the game. And how many times do we see this happening in sports? These stories happen, and we'll probably talk about this with the college football game too, is that you develop storylines, and all of a sudden, there were a lot of people last week were very unsure what was going to happen. And most people thought it was going to be a negative for the Rams, that they had too much going on, and then they got to go to Arizona, and it's just too much, and they're just not going to be able to concentrate on the game. And what happened was the exact opposite, is that they used it as a rallying cry. And you could tell after the game how important it was for them to make sure that their fellow citizens, because that's what they are, it's their neighbors, had something to feel good about. Well, the question then is was that a one game off? Is that out of their system, and now they're going to go on the road, and as Tony said, it's going to be bad weather, and then the game is going to be 27-3, and then they're going to go back home with their tails between the legs, and we're all going to go, well, you see? Or are they going to carry it another game and maybe even further? That this is just not for a week, because this is not going to be a week for these guys that we're going to be going back home to. This is going to be something that's going to be around for them for a very long time, and we need to play our hearts out for them. And that's kind of the angle that I'm going to go with, especially because I'm not really, as I've said before, I'm just not really that big of an Eagles guy this year. I know they've had a really good season, and they deserved it, and they are the better team in the NFC East this season, no question about it. But I just think that they're vulnerable, and I like the head coaching matchup for sure with McVay in this one over Sirianni. And yeah, I just Stafford looked awesome. The whole team looked awesome. The defense was flying around. And that's how the Rams are going to win this football game, is if that defense keeps playing the way that they played in the game last week, which I think they're going to. I think if they lose this game, it'll be because their offense and Matthew Stafford just can't move the ball very effectively. But I think they got a chance, a real chance, and they might be a scary team for the rest of the NFL if they keep winning games like this, and they keep this rally cry for what's going on to them in LA.
That's a good point. They made a comment after the win that they had in Glendale. That was the win for the people in the city of Los Angeles. They didn't let that affect them. Like, it appeared the Chargers let that affect them in their poor performance game at Houston. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot that Los Angeles is playing for in this particular game. As I mentioned before, on the 60-second take that we do at the end of the show, I'll explain a little bit more about which side I'll be getting to in this football game. Now, the biggie, guys, the game that everybody will be.
Mark, I don't think I've given my opinion on this one yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Andy. I'm sorry.
Because I'm going to give a counterpoint on that. On this one.
I would love to hear that. Please go ahead.
Well, I would say, okay. First of all, I think the emotion of last week's game has spent this team. I'm going to give an example. It's a little bit different. And that was the game right before the end of the season with San Francisco and Detroit. And that was San Francisco's Super Bowl. They were playing with a lot of emotion. They were out of the playoffs. They ended up losing that one, I think, in overtime. And then the following week, which was week 18, they just didn't show up in Arizona. Now, this is the playoffs, and it's a lot different. But keep in mind, they played that huge emotional game on last week against Minnesota, and now they're back home. They're still dealing with the issues. I can't see them coming out, especially, the game last week was a neutral site game. Crowd was 50-50. I can't see them going across country and coming up with that same emotional, intense effort for 60 minutes that they had last week because of the fact that, number one, they're going to have a limited crowd support there, and number two, it took a lot out of them. But more importantly, additionally, I'm going to take a look here. The Rams, I like the under in this game. The last 5 games for the Rams, they allowed 6 points to San Francisco, 9 points to the Jets, 9 points to Arizona, 30 in that meaningless loss in Week 18 to Seattle, and then 9 last week. At the same time, they also had, in the first 3 of those games, they only produced 12, 19, and 13 points. But the thing for me is the way Philadelphia has played, and we know that defensive improvement all season. The first 4 games of the year, Green Bay, Atlanta, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, they allowed 29, 22, 12, and 33. So that's 4 games. Since then, they have allowed more than 23 points just once, and that was in a loss to 36-33 loss to Washington. This defense has allowed double digits and a few games with single digits. I think the Rams are going to have a great deal of difficulty going up against that Philadelphia defense, and I think that Philadelphia is going to win this game probably. By the way, the average margin in playoff games since 1990, and it's pretty consistent through all 4 rounds of the playoffs, including the Super Bowl, is about 10.5 to 11.5 points. So it's not unusual for teams to win by margins, and I could see that happening here, especially. The other thing to keep in mind, this, Mark, you like to talk about mission teams. Philadelphia is a mission team this year after the way they faded in the second half of last year and were blown out in that first game against Tampa Bay. So I'm on Philadelphia in this one, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is one of those, let's say, 27-13 type games.
Excellent call, Andy. Good point on your part. Possible letdown here for the Rams in this football game after getting hyped up, geared up, and winning and getting what they wanted last week. Good side on your call there. Okay, guys, let's wrap this up on the NFL playoff card this weekend and go to that big game we were alluding to, Buffalo and Baltimore. Victor, this has AFC title game written all over it, but it's only the division round. What do you think happens here from an over-under perspective?
Right. We're going to wait till we get a little bit closer to the weekend. I do think that the Zay Flowers impact on the Ravens offense is important. So let's hold off until Sunday. His status is still up in the air for the divisional round. How have the Ravens performed, like with and without him? The Ravens are 27-10 straight up during the 2 seasons. Flowers has been inactive now just week twice. Week 18 last year against the Steelers. Baltimore lost the game 17-10. Don't forget Lamar Jackson also sat out in that contest. We also know that Buffalo has been an outstanding second half team this season. They've been the NFL's best team, ATS, in the second half. Not only that, but Buffalo has also been the NFL number 1 over the total team on the season. That's the way I'm leading in regards right now to the total in this game. I'm going to lay off the game total, but we've been rocking Buffalo team total overs for about a month now. We did it again last week. They got that late field goal to get the 31 points. And once again, they went over their team total. Yeah, we lost money on the over in the game, in that Denver Buffalo game, but at least we got our money back because we also played Buffalo over their team total. And put me down for that one. Buffalo over their team total this game. I think they get to 24 or more points pretty easy. Right now, I got it right around 23.5 for the Bills. So Buffalo over their team total at home.
Team total play from Victor. Victor, I'm sure Tuco might have had a little insight into that.
Oh, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. He goes over Buffalo first half of the football game. I like that call as well. Let me move it on forward here now. Next observation on this call, Jim Feist. Jim, have you heard any rumors or inklings about Zay Jones here so far? The number looks like they don't know what they want to do. This game's sitting pick 1.5. And if he does play, it's going to, I'm sure, go to Baltimore 2.5. If he doesn't, it'll go to pick and Buffalo 1. What's your take on the Zay Jones situation, and how are you going to approach this game?
You mean Zay Flowers?
Zay Flowers, I'm sorry, yes.
Flowers, yes. No, I don't. But I have been following some of the wise guys out here, and they're really mixed on this game. We hit Buffalo opened favorite. Ravens went to the favorite. When the game opened, I did take the Ravens in a teaser because I got 7.5, and I put them with a couple other combinations. That doesn't mean I like the Ravens to win. I just thought it was an optimal play to do that. I like the over. I think that the Henry issue is not looked at enough. Since they moved him out and they spread their offense, he has been he's a monster. The guy is a freak of nature. 1,900 yards rushing this year. And, of course, mix him in with Lamar and his running ability. And Lamar's not that bad a passer either. I don't think he ever gets the real credit for what he can do there. This is a good football team, and they did play earlier this year. Defensively, I think there's holes on the Bills team that can be taken advantage of. And coach-wise, I'm going to go back to the Harbaugh name. I do favor the coach. I cannot fault anything about Josh Allen. He's an amazing player. He carries this team a lot. Everybody talks about him being the most valuable player, and he very well might be. He's amazing. But their defense has been hurting, and since Milano is the same situation as Dean in defensive play caller, he missed a lot of time. Since he's come back, his grading has not been anywhere near what it was. Like, for example, a Pro Football Focus, I think it is great, has graded him as 162 since he returned. He was up at the top 5 before he went out. So that's a big fall off on the defensive side of the ball from your captain, your defensive captain. So I think there's a big edge to me in all those factors to Baltimore. I'm not going to go play Baltimore as a favorite on the road in Buffalo. I think it's a very difficult situation, but I do like the over. And when I had the optimal teaser, getting 1.5 plus 6, 7.5, I took it, but it's not there anymore. It's because Baltimore has gone to the favorite.
Well, Jim's going to wait and see what happens there. He may push his position a little bit more depending upon the Zay Flowers situation and the line movement of the football game. Tony Mejia, big battle here. This could be an AFC championship game like I mentioned before. These two football teams might be, along with Kansas City, the 3 best teams in the AFC. What do you think happens in this game?
Yeah, update from 2 hours ago for our listeners, Wednesday afternoon. Every Raven practiced except Zay Flowers. So that's not a great sign, but it really, if he's limited on Thursday, there's a good chance he gives it a go. It's obviously going to be a burst thing, and it's not going to help, I think, that it's going to feel like it's -10. And it really depends, to me, on whether I'm betting the over, which I would agree with. I think everybody that has spoken thus far, that's my lean. But if it's windy, if the winds pick up and it's a nasty Buffalo night, then we may just see a rugby match. And I personally don't mind that because there's not two quarterbacks that I'd rather watch play rugby than Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. But we will see how that transpires. Like I would probably, I know what I'm doing with the side regardless, but total wise, I'm going to wait to 6 p.m. on Sunday night and see how the weather is actually shaping up. No reports of snow, just that it's going to be -10 and feel like it's just going to be 10 degrees and feel like it's -10. So certainly being without Flowers would be not crippling for Baltimore, but it really knocks everybody else down a notch because they use his speed to open up holes in opposing defenses. Buffalo, if you love the revenge factor, there's no bigger revenge than having your ass handed to you the way they did earlier this season by Baltimore. It was early in the season, but they lost 35-10. Derrick Henry rushed for 199 yards, and they got outgained 427 to 236 for their first loss of the season. And a little dose of humility, maybe a little bit of I told you so for some people that thought that Buffalo would maybe take a step back, which didn't happen. So they certainly recovered from there. Baltimore has really worn down teams, and I'll throw away the playoff game because that was over at halftime. But from weeks 15 to 18, the wear you down factor really came into play with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson just chipping away, and then offensive line eventually making grown men quit. And I believe the number was 66-21. Them outscoring opponents in the second half. There were some dogs in there, but a big Pittsburgh game. Philadelphia went toe to toe with them and won that fourth quarter in their 24-19 win. And since that game, they've been lights out. So I think I'll save my pick on the game for my 1 minute, but certainly just an update on the Flowers thing. Doesn't look great at the moment, and certainly this is the game of the weekend.
Andy, Tony says that it's going to be 10 degrees playing time on the field, -10 below. I heard there's an opening for a sideline reporter. Should I put your name in for that?
No, because that would mean I'd be missing watching the other game played that day.
Okay, I understand. Nothing.
Yeah,
to do
that's
with
the reason.
Okay.
10 degrees wouldn't bother me. Look, I was at a game. It was the year after the Jets won the Super Bowl. And they hosted Kansas City in a wild card game, and I think the wind chill was like -13 degrees or something. Stay to the bitter end.
Oh boy.
So that didn't bother me.
And you're only a few years older, so it shouldn't really matter.
It shouldn't matter now. But in this game, I'm going to throw this stat out. Now, Baltimore did play a somewhat more difficult schedule than Buffalo, but for the season, including the playoff games, the average points scored: Baltimore 30.3, Buffalo 30.9. They both allowed exactly 20.8 points per game. I mean, you can't get much more even in that statistic than these two teams show, and a lot of it has to do with, as well, this game being a pick'em. Buffalo has really been extraordinary this year, beginning with their I think it was game number 7 against Tennessee. They scored 30 or more points in all but 2 of their remaining games. 24 against New England in a comeback from behind loss after they had already clinched the division, and then that loss in week 18, 16 against New England. So this team has been just as hot. Baltimore's been just as hot offensively. They did have a couple of games in the second half of the season where they scored under 20 points, 16 and 19 or something. So I do like the over in this game because the offenses are the strengths of both teams. Jim talked about the Buffalo defense, and it hasn't been as strong as it has been in the past. But the Baltimore defense also. Baltimore has been known for being one of the top defensive teams in the league. That had not been the case this year as much as it had been in the past, although some of their defensive secondary play has been somewhat better. I do like Buffalo in this game. And I'm going to be interested, Mark, if you have the number on this, or maybe you can find it between now and after Greg goes, and that is teams that in a revenge game, and they're playing at home, and they lost by 21 or more points, for example, earlier in the season, that team, how those teams fare. Not that I consider revenge much of a factor in the playoffs because obviously you don't win, you don't play them anymore. But as far as the approach to preparing for this game, if we find out that these teams in revenge are let's say there are 20 games, let's say they're 13-7, that might mean something about the fact that they were able to make the necessary adjustments. On the other hand, if they're in revenge and they're 7-13, it tells you that that first game was no fluke, and the better team that won the first game also won the second game. So I'd be interested if you have that information. But as far as my selection on this game, I do like the over. I wouldn't be surprised if if they both get to 28 points, that game's going to go over, and I wouldn't be surprised if the winner in this game and possibly even the loser hit at least 30. And I'm not going to say barring turnovers because you never know where those turnovers are going to occur. If they occur in your own territory, it increases scoring. If they occur after you've marched 65 yards downfield and you turn it over, it decreases scoring. So we don't know about that. So I do like the over in the game, and I do like Buffalo. I've been thinking all this year that Buffalo did not receive the kind of preseason hype that they've usually gotten because that was reserved for Kansas City. It was reserved for Baltimore, who was the number 1 seed last year. So I'm going to go with the Bills. And one more thing, and again, this may be another factor that you have, Mark, that you've looked at. The lines maker opened Buffalo a 1-point favorite in this game, having to know that the money was going to come in on Baltimore because how impressive they've been down the stretch and how they just won that game last week against a Pittsburgh team that really struggled. But Baltimore's been extremely impressive. And now the line, and they had to figure the money was going to come in on Baltimore, and it didn't take until late in the week. It's almost like the Notre Dame Penn State game where Notre Dame opened up the favorite, and Penn State went. And again, similar number, 1.5, and turned to 1.5. I'm not going to make the comparison between the two because there's no real connection there. But I have to wonder if the odds makers have it right, especially knowing that they're more likely to get support for the Baltimore team, especially when you go back and take a look at that first game between these teams.
Great point, Andy. We'll see exactly how this all shakes out. And like you, I wouldn't be surprised, like the Penn State Notre Dame game, that there isn't a push on this game on game day, especially once the Zay Flowers situation has all worked itself out. And by the way, and the totals are from revenge. We don't do margins on revenge margins in our database, so I'm not able to do something like that in this particular sense. I just know there's revenge and there's revenge. And when you have revenge from 35-10, that's meaningful revenge. But that's not your answer to your question. That's just my observation is all it is.
It's also, by the way, again, as I say, in the playoffs, it can be used as a factor. But if you're relying on revenge to get you motivated for a playoff game where your season can end, I think there's something that's not going on right there. Because the interest here, you could use it as a little bit of motivation, but I would think that Buffalo would be using it as, I won't say secondary motivation, but hey, we've been playing all season to get to this point, and we know we have to do something that we didn't do in the first game.
Greg DePalma, what do you see going on here, Buffalo-Baltimore, in this classic AFC divisional matchup?
I'm going to second Andy's pick. I'm going to take the Bills here. I think that a couple of reasons. One is that I just don't usually bet on Lamar Jackson in the postseason, and it usually works out, especially when he's up against really good teams. Like last year, he had a really good game. It's probably his best game in the playoffs in that first round win over Houston. What does he do the next week? As a favorite at home against Kansas City, he lays an egg. So just because he played pretty well last week, he still threw for less than 200 yards. I'm not going to necessarily think that means that his inability to play well in the postseason is behind him. He needs to make a deep run, a run that you believe he can make, Mark. That's why you picked him to win the Super Bowl. If he can do that, obviously, then all that stuff is gone. But I need to see it to believe it. The other thing, too, is, Matt Milano has been banged up, as Jim said. Last week, though, it was his best game. He played his best game. He had a few tackles. He had a sack. So no question that Matt Milano needs to step up in this game, because if Zay Flowers plays, or if he's injured, which if he plays, he's going to be banged up and probably not very effective, you would guess, especially with the conditions. It is going to be about the running game. And this is where Matt Milano and that Buffalo defense is going to have to stop the running game. And I think that what I saw from last week, they're now more than capable of being able to do that. But I guess we'll see. So yeah, I say the major thing for me though is that I just can't back Lamar Jackson in a big game in the postseason until he wins a big game in the postseason.
Just the fact that he's only won 3 of 7 playoff games doesn't. I don't think that bodes well for him. No, not at all. But I'm going to put you down with Andy. The same thing on Buffalo in this game here, guys. Before I get to my side in this game, I'm going to lay this out here. One of the couple of reasons I got the Baltimore here was, number one, they were playing so great season-ending momentum, and they were the only team that had out-yarded every team they played, other fellow playoff team. In fact, they're now 11-0 in the total yards against other playoff teams, and they win those games by an average of 124 yards a game. As dominant as any team is statistically, the Baltimore Ravens, they check that box. My concern for this football game for Baltimore, though, is this. You're laying points into a Buffalo Bills football team that nobody should be laying points into Buffalo against. This is a Buffalo football team that they've undefeated at home so far this football season here. They've 11-0 to the 8-3 strip, 11-0 to the spread. Well, that's Baltimore, I'm saying. Buffalo here, coming into this game here, 15-2 straight up in the playoffs when they have the better win percentage, which they do. Coming to this particular contest here.
And by the way, they weren't a home dog this year, were they? No. So they haven't been a home dog since 2020.
A long, long time between drinks of water for this team.
Yeah.
9-0 at home this year, favored every football game.
And remember, we talked about the fact that I think the best thing for Baltimore to make a run would my analysis would be that they would be the dog, that they would be sort of take that role of, oh no, we knew they were going to go on the road to play Buffalo and Kansas City, but now they're the favorite again. It's like I just don't think this is the good role for them. I think they're just in a much better shape if they were considered the dog and everybody's picking Buffalo. And that's another problem that I think you just made a really good point on again, Mark.
Well, when you find teams that have better records and they're underdogs in games, that sort of wakes teams up. What are we doing the underdog? We're the better football team. And I think to a man, Buffalo feels they're the better team here. I think the bottom line to me is I know that Baltimore's been in this run 5-0 straight up in ATS coming into this football game the last 5 games. But you don't lay points in Buffalo. They're just simply too dangerous, and they're too motivated with that nasty revenge. I'm going to play Buffalo in this football game as a hedge against my Super Bowl prop. And I feel like if I can win Buffalo, especially get Buffalo as a dog in this football game, who knows what happens where it falls. But nonetheless, I'm going to hedge Buffalo in this game because I like it as a handicap and also hedging my prop play. So put me down on the Buffalo Bills in the football game. All right, guys, let's wrap up the show here. There's another football game on tap here, I think somewhere being played on Monday night. Oh, it's the college football championship game. And quite a matchup we've got in this championship game here. And I'm anxious to hear what everybody's take and side is on this contest here. And Victor, I'm going to start it off with you. Whether it's the side or the over-under total in the game, what are you looking at in this contest?
We're going to definitely lean under in the game. We were on the under in the Buckeyes-Texas game. The 28-14 final score. And we got lucky in that game because, again, there could have easily been a case, as you guys know, where that game is like 21-21 and it's going into overtime. And you know what happens in college football? It's where unders go to die is college football overtime. Let's be real, because there's a very, very good chance that game would have went over if Texas scores that touchdown in which they had a 1st and goal at the Ohio State 2-yard line. You saw what happened. It ended up being a scoop and score for the Buckeyes. All of a sudden, instead of a tie game, it's a 14-point game. But I'm leaning under right now at the 46.5, and that is the current number out there, guys. You got to think, how is Marcus Freeman going to be playing this particular game? I think he tries to drain the clock as much as possible, particularly in the first half of the game, dragging out the game, trusting his team to make fewer mistakes perhaps than Ohio State. That was their exact recipe for upsetting Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and the Irish enjoyed a very similar advantage on the margins against the Bulldogs in that game. Notre Dame, of course, they can't beat Ohio State vertically. We know that. They even have issues at the running back position right now. I mean, you may say that Leonard might be their best runner right now with the Jeremiah Love knee injury. And, of course, a playoff basically no-show from the other running back, Price. I'm not sure Ohio State will beat Notre Dame from a vertical standpoint either. And, yeah, the Buckeyes should win the game. I mean, they're favored by almost double digits. I'm less convinced they cover the spread. I don't think Notre Dame scores a heck of a lot here, and they keep the Buckeyes in the low 20s. So under 46.5 is my pick in the game, guys.
Victor goes under in the big football game, the college football playoff championship game, and it should be a doozy. This is the 12-team playoff, the first time we've seen something like this so far. It's been worked out, I say, pretty well as far as that is all concerned. Jim, I know you're not a big college football guy, but any passing thoughts you might have on this championship game?
Well, this in the playoffs, I've had some opinions, and I'm actually on the under in this game, but I'm also, for all the reasons that Victor points out, and there's nobody better with totals than Victor, but this, I gave you a teaser before with the Lions and the Chiefs, and that's a 2-team teaser. Move it down under 3, 2.5 is the most you should lay with that. Now you can do the same thing with this team, and you can take two different sports, college and pro. You can mix it up. So you got the Chiefs, the Lions, and the Buckeyes all in a teaser, and get the number down under 3. You're laying no more than 2.5 with any of them, and that's a 3-team teaser along with the under in the game. That's my opinion on the game.
Jim takes advantage of those teasers going through 2 numbers with 3 teams. The beauty of this, of watching everything here on Proline TV, guys, with all these videos in our ATS podcast included here, is not only are we sharing handicapping information with you, but people like Jim Feist are sharing how to bet information. And I can tell you from my long, long years in this business, this industry, and as a bettor and a gambler and a handicapper, it's probably safe to say, Jim, you correct me if I'm wrong, a person is better off knowing how to bet than who to bet.
Oh, no question. I mean, well, first of all, it starts with money management. You can't bet too much because you know what your budget is, and you shouldn't make anything more than 2 or 3% on any bet. So, and you shouldn't blow it all in 1 week, of course. But how to bet? And the one thing that, as we're all a little bit older, although Tony's still a kid, but see that Tony, keep smiling. But when we were
I'm closer to 50 than 40.
Pardon?
I said I'm closer to 50 than 40. That makes you sad.
You're still a kid.
To me, that makes you a kid. But when we started out betting, you didn't have all this prop stuff where you could bet this running back and that quarterback and anytime touchdowns and stuff. We didn't have all those options available to us. As a matter of fact, when we started, there was no such thing as total betting. It was just the sides. And so over the years, we've added all these options. Now the younger generation has picked up on that, and they love propositions. So I'm learning. I get better with it every year. But the kids change the world, and you want to stop changing the world, stop having kids. But they have figured out how to beat these props, and I pay attention. And these teasers, I like all 3 of these teams to win. I don't like laying almost double digits with 3 teams. So I'm going to go with that. Now, the other way you could do it, if you want to do it, is you could do a money line parlay with all 3 teams and forget the teasers and just go with the money line parlay. So,
and by the way, excuse me, Jim, the people who are considering that money parlay, do the actual math to find out what the money line parlay pays at the current point spreads before you automatically play a teaser. There might be a very slight difference, but it could be 5 to 10% more or less by doing the money line as opposed to just the teaser.
Yeah, a lot of good parlay calculators out there that just serve as a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good point.
Well, like I said, guys.
Yes.
Oh, but by the way, Mark, let me just add one thing.
Yes.
What you said about, not who to bet, but how to bet.
Yes.
That's why so many professionals, the saying has been around for years, they don't bet teams, they bet numbers.
Right.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You bet on the pros, not the Joes. I like that theory real well. Let's go now. Let's move it over here. Tony Mejia, how do you see this national championship game all working out on Monday night?
I see it as a game that I'm done betting against Ohio State. So, I mean, the Oregon, I was on Oregon, they were my national champion. So, therefore, I was definitely going to be on the Ducks there. But I was against Ohio State against Tennessee, and I was against Ohio State with Texas. I just thought it was too many points. I thought the Buckeyes would probably win late, and who knows, without that fumble, maybe it does become a 24-21 Ohio State victory late. But the fact that they did get that fumble, and they're just a team, I won't use team of destiny. They're a team that, to me, has peaked at the perfect time. This is a team that a lot of people expected to see that I found underwhelming for most of September and October, and obviously came into this college football playoff off laying a huge dud against rival Michigan. So the only way I see Notre Dame really winning this game is if Ryan Day finds a way to screw it up, because we've now seen Notre Dame, and props to what Marcus Freeman has been able to do, with the defense that has lost its defensive captain and top player in the secondary, its top defensive lineman, and continues to find answers. And now they'll have to replace. He's a freshman, but they'll have to replace a key offensive tackle. So it just seems to me that Ohio State, because of how well they did in the transfer portal, and the amount of money that they spent on this program, not that Notre Dame doesn't, is the much deeper team, and continues to add to that by the fact that they're playing teams after getting past Texas. They're playing a Notre Dame team that has had just nicks along the way as they've gotten to this point, rightfully, I may add. So I'm going with the Buckeyes and laying the points.
Tony Mejia on the Ohio State Buckeyes in this football game. Greg DePalma, how do you see this game shaking out?
Well, hearing Tony break it down the way he did, I'll go with Notre Dame. No, obviously Tony's been against Ohio State, so now he's with them, and that's never a good thing to do. So you know what'll happen to Tony. Yeah, I think that I obviously was all over Ohio State in the game last week, and it didn't turn out the way I thought it was, even though they won and covered. But I think a lot of that had to do with them coming down to the mean. They had such a great game against Oregon, and then they really screwed up big time early in that game with stupid penalties, killing drives, kept the Texas in the game. But they pulled it out, and whether or not, and I think Tony's right to an extent as far as them being a team of destiny, the way that they're playing, the way they're coming up with big plays at big times, especially. The opposite side, though, I think is really where you have to look at team of destiny. Because as you mentioned as well with the injuries, they have had a banged up team all season. They lost some key guys early in the season along the defensive front. Then they lose Morrison, one of the best corners in the draft, who was going to come out in the draft. Then they lose their best defensive lineman in the Indiana game. Then they lose their left tackle in the game last week. And Love is banged up, their prized running back. But I think what's happening is, as Tony mentioned, if Ohio State loses this game, Ryan Day is going to have to screw it up. That's how Marcus Freeman and the Irish have won these games, because Georgia was stupid to throw the football late in the first half when they had no offense. Nothing was happening. Well, let's try to see if we can get something going here, because Notre Dame is going to get the opening kickoff. And what happens? It completely ended the game. Sack, next play, touchdown. Kickoff second half, touchdown, game over. What happens to Penn State at the end of the game last week? I could not believe James Franklin called timeout and then decided he was going to try to move the ball down the field. Why? You weren't passing the ball all game effectively. Notre Dame's got one of the best defensive secondaries in football. They were proving it to you the entire game. You were running the ball great. So what do? You try to throw the football. You put all the pressure into this kid's hands, who's going to be a really good quarterback down the road, but just didn't have it in this game, and you got what you deserved. Once again, Freeman did a great job allowing the other coach to screw up. So will Ryan Day do what he did in the Michigan game and screw up? I guess that is very possible, but I can't go against Notre Dame being 12-2 against the spread this season. They have just been a spreads dream, and I'm going to continue to go that path. I can easily see Ohio State blowing Notre Dame away in the second half because they're just too talented. But I'm gonna say Notre Dame is going to hang in there. It's going to be a really good dogfight, and I honestly I just wouldn't be shocked if Notre Dame won because of this team of destiny thing could happen. But Ohio State is probably the smarter way to go, which is why I think Jim makes a really good point. If you're going to go this way, you might as well just take Ohio State, but try to limit those points as much as you can.
So no money line play for Notre Dame for Greg DePalma then.
No, I will hedge it because I have a bet on Ohio State. Jim woke me up to the parlay a few weeks ago. He said a friend of his did the parlay for the NFL champion and the college football champion. And so I went ahead and did the same thing. And I still have Ohio State and Kansas City.
Yeah, same here. Nice.
Okay. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should do Notre Dame and Kansas City just in case, or Notre Dame in the money line, because I do think there's a chance. I do. If I thought there was no chance, like last week, I didn't really think Texas had a chance and I wouldn't have hedged it. But I think Notre Dame, I think they have a chance.
So are you already in then? Because it opened 9.5 and then has been steadily come back down.
Well,
to
it would
8.
be money line. So
no, I'm talking about because you're on Notre Dame.
Yeah. No. Well. Yeah. Oh no, I haven't done the point spread yet. No, I haven't done it yet. I know the line has come down, but I haven't taken advantage of it yet. So yeah, I've lost a 1.5 at this point.
Andy Isco, what do you think happens in this big championship game? Buckeyes, Fighting Irish. What's your side?
In the interest of time, I'm going to use that for my 60 seconds.
Very good. I like that.
By the way, I was planning on that all along, so it's not like in the interest of time, really.
Short and succinct here. Okay. Real quick before we get over that 60-second thing, just a little observation on my part here. I look at this football game, and, I'm from Ohio. Victor's from Ohio. We follow the Buckeyes, but you don't bet with your heart. You bet with numbers. And it's very, very difficult for me to step in front of a Notre Dame football team that's playing as well as they are right now, riding an 11-game point streak. Their defense can go toe-to-toe with Ohio State. They're number 1 and number 2 in points allowed this year defensively. There's not a lot separating these two football teams is basically what I'm saying. And at an 8.5 or a 9-point spread, I think you have to take advantage of the value in a situation just like this. And there's one thing I'm going to pass along to our listeners out there. I was not a Riley Leonard fan at all until one of our Astute Coffee Club members sent an email to me, and he called out a fact here about him, the fact that he was in the same Manning Passing Academy camp. He was here, as was Will Howard. So they were roommates, in fact. So they know each other really rather quite well. They're quite familiar with each other. But in the course of all that, he also called out the fact that Riley is really, really attuned to the football game, and he's got himself grounded down to earth, and he wears this on his wrist, and he looks at it all the time for confidence and reassurance. And what is on his wrist says this. It says, "Those who exalt themselves or praise themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be praised." I love that about the kid. He's just a down-to-earth, humble kid. He's not looking to be better than anybody else. Just stay in your game and stay in your wheelhouse. And that's what I like about the makeup of him. Rather than getting into, if you're in Vegas, and imagine this, guys, in the days of old, if there were two windows in Vegas, one was a window to bet Ohio State, and one was a window to bet Notre Dame, what would you want to do? Would you want to stay in that long and winding lane of Ohio State, along with all the betting public that's going to be in there, and a line wrapped around the sports book? Or would you want to get into the Notre Dame line, get in and out, make your bet, and feel good about the fact that you didn't have to wait there an hour just to make your bet? I'm getting in and out with Notre Dame plus the points in this game. That's my side to the game.
I want to go behind the counter and take all the bets from everybody.
I'm sorry?
I want to go behind the counter and take all the bets.
That's the guy to be, definitely.
I'm sure you do.
Mark, as two natives of the Buckeye State, who would have ever thought that the Buckeyes would be prohibitive favorites to win the national championship in a season in which A, they lost to Michigan, and B, they didn't even play in their conference championship.
Yeah.
I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around how that can actually occur. It's the new
era.
playout system, right?
It's a new era of college football. And by the way, I think what another good parlay might be Notre Dame and Detroit, because just think of it. Both of the teams are in the same situation. Notre Dame, if they win the national championship with all the injuries they had, it would be remarkable. So therefore, if Notre Dame could do it, so could Detroit with all the injuries they had. So maybe you put them together, and you get a nice parlay there as well. So keep that in mind, because again, they have had so many injuries. It's just been incredible how Marcus Freeman has just shown you what a great coach he's turned into.
Now it seems like they're getting both sides of the action at the number 8, so it may not move. But Mark, you would have been in the longer line because 77% of the public was on Notre Dame at plus 9.5 earlier this week. So I would have gotten in. Actually, I would have waited because that's what I do. I wait to see what numbers do. I would have gotten in
game day.
Gotten the shorter line.
Let's see what that line is on game day, Tony. Okay.
What do you think? Do you think it's going to move to 8.5, 9?
I think there's money going to come to Ohio State because I think the betting public's going to come out with both fists on the Buckeyes in this football game. That's my own personal opinion.
Well, especially because they've won so easily, certainly by the point spread, by the final score, the first 3 games they played.
There's definitely going to be movement because it's the only show in town that night. Everybody will be jazzed up, but from wild card or from divisional playoff weekend. But the fact is, right? I think Ohio State -8, I think is probably the best number you're going to get if you're betting the Buckeyes. Maybe there'll be a 7.5. That'd be great for me. But the bottom line is, I think everybody that saw the opening number thought that's kind of disrespectful to the Irish.
And keep in mind, these two teams have played the last 2 years. They've been very close games. Ohio State won them both low-scoring games, but Notre Dame has covered both games. Matter of fact, Notre Dame should have won the game last year, but they had that miraculous drive Ohio State did. And matter of fact, that last play when Ohio State scored, they got in by like an inch. Notre Dame had 10 guys on the field, didn't have an 11th guy on the field. So there was a lot of Notre Dame fans recall that. It was in Notre Dame. It was big. I remember that. I mean, it was a really big game. It was a close game. But, I think that also might come into play, that Notre Dame kids, a lot of them were in that game. We can hang with these guys. So that kind of stuff is important as opposed to maybe not of playing this team for 15 years or something like that.
Let me mention one thing about the game 2 years ago, because it was 21-10. Ohio State was favored by 17. Last year, I think the game was around 3.5, and it turned out to be a 3-point game. So it was a big difference between covering as a 17-point dog and covering or pushing as a 3.5-point dog. But the 3 and 3.5-point dog is the more recent game because that was 2023.
All right, guys, what do you say, Greg? Let's we got to put a wrap on the show. We've gone kind of overtime, if you will.
Just a little bit
of bonus for our listeners out there. And we want to remind everybody that's watching or listening to the show to hit the like button and subscribe to Proline TV, where a lot of great things are in the making. You're going to love coming to the network. Not only are you going to see our Against the Spread podcast, you're going to see handicapping shorts from all of our experts. You're going to see podcasts from other well-known individuals in this industry posting their podcast at Proline TV, your one-stop source for all your handicapping information. Brady Cannon has joined us now. He's become our golf extraordinaire expert. Greg and Brady just did a show this particular week, so if you want to get into golf and make some side money on the links, check those out here at Proline TV and hit that subscribe button. So, Greg, I'm going to hand it off to you for our 30-second segment and whatever else you'd like to wrap it up with.
Sounds good. So I'm real happy whenever I hear everybody going. I'll save that for the shorts. I'll save everybody's saving something for the shorts. So I think that means everybody's focused. So let's go ahead and make sure we get this right. Again, 60 seconds or less, or I'll edit it down to make it work for everybody. So let's. We've got a full stable of handicappers here for once. It's been a while, so let's go ahead and get this done. And I'm going to go ahead and start with our host, Mark Lawrence. You're going to go first, Mark. I expect you'll do well. I don't think you've ever gone over 60, so no pressure.
No, I won't be over 60, Greg. That's for sure. I'm going to go to obviously one of the NFL playoff games this weekend. Let's go to the city of brotherly love where the Fly Eagles Fly will be the talk in Philadelphia when they host the Rams this particular week. Andy Isco, our cohort, I should say, made a great point about the possibility of a Rams letdown in this football game. I just don't see it. You're talking about a Philadelphia team here that's dominated the Rams in the past. Yeah, but that's all been in the past. What works to me in this football game is revenge in the divisional round works superbly. 16-7-1 against the spread since 1999 in this particular role. They got spanked in November, did the Rams by the Eagles in this particular contest. And I also alluded to the fact that since Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp have been back, this team is on a red-hot roll all since the bye week here. Give me the Rams plus the points. I think McVay is on something special here, and I think he's going to make it to the championship game.
As usual, perfectly done by Mark. 57 seconds. So
very good.
That's professional for you. All right. Next up, we're going to go to Tony. Are you ready, Tony? Mute that mic and let's get going.
All right. Well, I'm going to say that Lamar Jackson, whether he wins MVP or not, will prove most naysayers wrong and go into Buffalo and win a playoff game in poor conditions, whether he has Zay Flowers or not. I think it's going to be a great game. Obviously, you bet the Ravens on the money line because you're not laying the one and pushing if it's a 1-point game. I think the money line's only at -115. I think the Ravens have been the more battle-tested team down the road, playing the Steelers, the Texans, tough game against the Browns, and then another rival of the Steelers. But Bills have not been tested at all. Patriots twice, Jets, and a walkover game against the Broncos after falling behind 7-0. So give me the Ravens on the money line.
All right. You very short there, Tony. 42 seconds. So you were in complete control. Okay. Next up, we are going to go with Victor. Are you ready, Victor?
Yeah, go ahead. Start me off here.
All right, you got it. Take it over.
It sounds like Mark also perhaps likes the Rams on the money line in that particular game. I'm going to respectfully and professionally disagree with most of the panel, and I'm going over the total in the Rams-Eagles game. But there's a caveat: 43.5 or less. I see it's right around 44. At 44 or 45, I lay off, but I do bet the over at 43.5. It's going to be the most least impactful weather game of the four this weekend. Okay, I know there's a dome game. Still, 39 degrees, very light chance of snow, only 8-mile-an-hour winds in Philadelphia. We all know the Rams are going to have to throw the ball to win this game. And from our database, guys, there's a couple of good stuff here in the division round. Underdogs who allowed 10 or less points in the wild card round, 9-0 to the over. That applies to the Rams in this particular game. We're going over the total, 43.5.
Excellent, Vic. Beautiful. Right on the number.
Thank you.
All right. 2 more to go.
He knew just when to get out. That was perfect.
Yeah, he did. All right. Let's go with Andy. What do you were saving the college football championship game for this one, Andy? So
yes, I was. So let me begin.
You go right ahead. You're up.
Notre Dame has confounded the experts all year. Actually, 13-2 against the spread. The one failure to cover was when they won by a big margin, but not big enough against Miami, Ohio, and obviously the loss to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame's been underdogs twice this year. 3 in the opening game when they went down to Texas A&M and won to open the season, and then a very slight 1-point underdog last week when they defeated Penn State. So they've continually overperformed all year. You talked about the 2 games that they just lost. They're 0-6 straight up against Ohio State since like 1990. The last 2 games were close, especially the game last year, which was a 3-point game. The numbers this year support this being another competitive game. My power ratings and other metrics have it being a close game. I think Ohio State wins, but I do think it also stays under the total. I'm looking at something like 23-20, 24-17, 17, something like that.
All right on the number. Also, right at the 1 minute mark. Beautiful.
I think these guys have got stopwatches, Greg. That's what I
think so. They're cheating.
I wish I could be that good.
I hope they cheat. Makes my life easier. By the way, with that history lesson, Andy, the fact that they haven't won in 50, 60 years, what I can say to that, they're due. So
But they were due for the last 5 meetings. So,
yeah,
but I understand the point. Yes, absolutely.
This is the big one.
I'm not sure I'm gonna. I look. I'm rooting for Notre Dame because I have that prop bet that had anybody but Georgia or Ohio State winning. I'm just not sure I can feel comfortable, but I do expect it to be a close game. In fact, I'll just mention because, Mark, you get the newsletter, Jim gets the newsletter. I have this thing called X Factor, which attempts to correlate yards gained with points scored. Basically, meaning if you rank first in yards gained, you should rank first in points scored, etc. 13th, you should rank 13th, etc. Notre Dame, I think, has the highest or second highest plus margin, both offensively and defensively this season. That means they're getting contributions for special teams. They're getting contributions from scoring touchdowns more so than field goals and taking advantage of field position. They've been doing that really all this postseason. Their special teams has been outstanding. So I'll just add that in there. So I could see him winning the game. I feel more comfortable taking the points.
And their special teams is even better now because their place kicker finally got healthy.
Yep.
And he's been automatic in the postseason. All right. So here we go with our final contestant. Can't wait for the typical weekly short wisecrack from Jim. So what do you got for us this week, Jim? Are you ready?
I'm supposed to start on that?
Yeah.
Well, this is the contenders versus the pretenders. We got the Kansas City Chiefs. We got Andy Reid. We got Spagnuolo. We got Mahomes. We got Kelsey. We've got the real deal. This is a real deal steal. Kansas City's been playing with their food all year long, winning by small margins. Tremendous record, very few losses. They're here to make history, to win the 3rd straight Super Bowl. I don't know if they'll get there because they're going to have some tough teams on the NFC side to get through. But in this game, you're taking an indoor team, putting them outdoors against a real defense, and you're not going to get 4 interceptions from Mahomes like you did from Herbert. You're going to have to earn this one. It's not going to happen. The Chiefs win big.
All right, 45 seconds in. So very similar to Tony's number, getting it. But you all got in before the 1 minute, which is really awesome. So like I said, everybody's a professional now and trying to one-up each other, and you certainly have done that. All right, before we wrap it up, let's take a look at what we've seen with the comments and also with the Coffee Club emails. Don't forget to subscribe to the Coffee Club emails that are delivered in your inbox at 6 a.m. And we'll have a link in the description of how to sign up for the Coffee Club emails. So check that out because there's always some really cool things that you'll find. Sometimes, hey, you might check it out. You might go, well, I don't get anything interesting here. But I guarantee if that's the case, the next 3, 4, or 5 of them, you'll find something very interesting. So it's available just very simply by going, like I said, to the link in the description and ordering the Coffee Club email. And if you do that, you'll find cool things in there like this. We had an interesting one from Paul Feinbaum. The fact that he's covered the SEC for a long time and he's known for being a bit of a homer for the league. However, Feinbaum is not pulling punches about this year's poor showing for the SEC in the college football playoff. Ohio State and Notre Dame are in the national championship game, and they are combined to eliminate 3 SEC programs on their way there. So Ohio State and Notre Dame combined to go 3-0 against the SEC. The Buckeyes blew out Tennessee, beat Texas. Meanwhile, Notre Dame knocked out Georgia. And Feinbaum says, I don't care what any of my colleagues say in the South. There's no way to sugarcoat this year for the SEC. There's no way to say anything other than we've got a team from Indiana and a team from Ohio playing for the national championship in Atlanta. And so he moves on and says, cry me a river because Georgia has a couple of players that were banged up and Quinn Ewers was banged up. Well, he was 100% last night and it still wasn't enough. And he goes on and blames Steve Sarkisian, which is a big surprise that Steve Sarkisian's being singled out. Anyway, this is the second straight year that SEC will be shut out of the college football playoff championship game. Last year, Michigan out of the Big Ten beat Washington from the Pac-12, who's now in the Big Ten, and that was the SEC season in a nutshell. And really, I mean, we talk about this being the first year of the 12-team playoff. What would really be, I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be ironic in a way and historic, obviously very historical, whoever wins because of the programs. But just the fact that Michigan hadn't really done anything for a long time. I know it wasn't a 12-team playoff, but Michigan won last year. If Notre Dame is able to do it this year, I just think it's very refreshing to have the old programs back, Michigan, Notre Dame, and it's not that same old SEC deal anymore. And I just think it's going to be better for college football. I don't know what you guys think.
That's like the Pope coming out against Catholics. Feinbaum's little diatribe. So,
that's true.
I'm curious to see what he says next year when he's politicking for his teams to get five bids.
Oh yeah, he's going to keep doing it. He's not going to stop.
Yeah, it's good for business.
And I wonder how much this is related to. I wonder how this is related to just the diversity and the widespread division of talent due to the portal rules right now, that teams like an Alabama or a Georgia just can't keep a lot of players that they would have been able to stow away for 2 or 3 years in the past.
100%.
Yeah, where Mississippi's just kicking ass in the portal.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not an exact science. It's not a quick fix. You have to, and look at what's going on in the championship game. We've got 2 portal quarterbacks playing in the national championship game.
Yep.
So it does work, but it doesn't work for everybody. Let's see. And one more, and this is important because I am of course, a Jet fan. I know Andy just referenced the Jets before, and he was young and was a Jet fan, of course, still is, but doesn't really reference it too often. And I understand why. But this was again in the Coffee Club email. We could have titled this piece "Another Murderer in the Hall of Fame." It's where the bust of the late O.J. Simpson can be found. It's also where former Kansas City offensive lineman Jim Trier could possibly reside should the NFL decide whether the 9-time Pro Bowler belongs in Canton. The backstory: Tyler's election to the Hall of Fame is contentious and complex. Back in September 15th, 1980, while the kids were sound asleep, Tyler shot and killed his wife before turning the gun on himself. The murder-suicide abruptly ended any talk of the Chiefs legend making the Hall of Fame, which once seemed like a certainty. Now, half a century later, he's a candidate again. Back on the ballot, Tyler, widely considered one of the best left tackles in NFL history, is among the 5 seniors category finalists in the class of 2025. He'll need at least 40 of 49 votes today to be inducted, and he might get them thanks to 2 factors that complicate his candidacy. Now, I don't know whether or not we've seen this vote turn out, but I will say this. I did a short, which actually got a ton of traffic over on the R Lads site about Mark Gastineau. And I know a lot of people commented, which I figured they would, about, Mark Gastineau's an asshole, and this is why he's not in the Hall of Fame. Nobody likes Mark Gastineau. Well, my retort was basically, you know what? There are a lot of people in the Hall of Fame, like O.J. Simpson, that have done a lot worse than being a jerk. So that shouldn't be why Mark Gastineau, they're not voting him in. And I do believe that that's the reason they're not voting him in, because he's not a popular guy. And here you got a guy that has murdered his family, and I know he's got mental problems, and I get that. And maybe it's because of football. But the fact is you're going to give the guys like this consideration, and you're not even going to get close to getting Mark Gastineau in the Hall of Fame when the guy's 6-year run was better than anybody ever that we have seen sacking quarterbacks in the NFL. So anyway, that was my rant. But I just think even if you take Gastineau out of the equation, I have no idea why this is happening.
I think personally, Greg, this whole thing with him getting into the Hall of Fame, to use a phrase Andy Isco would use, is it will be killed.
At some point, it might. You almost wonder, well, the situation with OJ sort of sets a little precedent with that, and that may be the thinking there, but it also shows what happens. You're talking about people who, were not even born, who are in positions of making decisions when that event occurred back in 1980.
Maybe shot down would have been the better word than killed.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Touché.
I thought you stopped in the first one, but no. By the way, a couple of comments from the latest videos we had. Big Chris says, "Great work, guys." And Glide 69. Good work streamlining things, getting these guys organized and making it easy to find their wisdom. That's Glide 69 and Big Chris. So those are some of the latest comments, which of course we completely welcome everybody to comment on any of these videos. And since we had a very long show, I'm going to be sure to break down each of our previews to make sure that they will be individually available to anybody that just wants to find out how we thought about one particular game, including the College Football National Championship game. So want to thank everybody that is, as far as our viewers, for participating. And like I said, if you leave a comment, that always gets everything going. And I think that's something that is also pretty cool. We can interact with you. And if you have any questions, just let us know.
Okay, guys, I want to thank you for joining us here. It was a bit of a marathon podcast, but we enjoyed doing it. And I want to remind everybody out there that we'll be back next week when we get prepared for the NFL championship round of the playoffs. And we'll also start merging in some basketball. If you're a hoops fan, you want to tune in for sure next week. For our panel of experts, once again, until next week, this is Mark Lawrence, reminding you to always remember to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.
Oh, an error occurred while we were trying to end the recording.